A lot of people think that you are going to run for Attorney General. What can you tell them today?
And what I can tell you is that
I don't buy that. Madam Secretary, how do you know that 15 people, and it's only 15 people, voted illegally? What did you do? And what methodology did you employ? I don't care if it's Republican or Democrat across the state. We want to know how they actually came up with that. We need to have clear criminal intent in violation of a particular criminal statute in order to charge anyone with a crime. People shouldn't just be charged with a crime because it's politically unpopular. People should not be persecuted or prosecuted in order to shut someone else up. None of this would be an issue if we actually had competent investigations that would occur at the state level.
What does that say about the Attorney General?
Are we just supposed to trust it? I'll tell you what, I'm not going to trust anything at face value. That's not how our system of justice works. We actually have clear laws. We're supposed to have a disinterested prosecutor.
It doesn't matter where you're from in the state. It's affecting everybody.
We shouldn't be going after electors. We shouldn't be going after school board members. We shouldn't be going after parents. We shouldn't be going after people who wanted to keep their businesses open during COVID. What we need to go after are people that are dangerous criminals and people that bring in this poison from other countries and they want to distribute it to our children here.
we actually go after criminals and keep our streets safe. We're not doing really anything to stop the lawfare. A lot of attorneys didn't want to do anything to challenge the government. I did something to challenge the government. We were successful.
Where does your moral compass come from? What do you think is the driving force?
Character is what you're doing when only God is looking.
What is your relationship with the U.S. Constitution?
We're about to actually reach a milestone in celebrating the founding and the birth of our country. It doesn't matter if you are a Republican or Democrat. It doesn't matter if you're a liberal or a conservative. We've had people persecuted and prosecuted and picked on. It is applicable and it's afforded to every single individual within the United States.
A lot of people talk about the Constitution as a living document.
The more we deviate from our principles, the more of a country we're going to cease to be.
What would you tell young people today?
Be selective about what you do. Be intentional. Because right now, I don't really see that everywhere across the state. We need to restore the rule of law and protect our constitutional rights. We need to restore our faith in government and elections. We also have to ensure that we're going to make Michigan the #1 place where our families can thrive.
A lot of people think that you are going to run for Attorney General. What can you tell them today?
And what I can tell you is...
Hi everyone, my name is Braden Giacobazzi, your Vice Chair for Michigan's District 9. Welcome all of you to our first podcast event. Michigan stands at a crossroads, grappling with questions of justice, fairness, family, immigration, cultural cohesion, election, corruption, and trust in our legal system. Today, we speak to one man whose name has received prominent attention in Republican circles across the state. Kevin Kijewski is a Birmingham attorney and founder of KDK Law, who steps into the spotlight today as a rumored possible candidate for Attorney General. He has a robust record in family law, criminal defense, and civil litigation. Mr. Kijewski has taken on high-profile cases, including defending Cliff Frost, one of the 16 individuals being persecuted in the nationally recognized and contentious 2020 electors case. Honored with a Vatican knighthood and known for his relentless advocacy for faith, equal educational opportunities for all inner-city students, and constitutional rights, Kijewski aims to restore impartiality and trust to Michigan's top legal office. Join us as we explore his vision for a just Michigan in this exclusive interview.
Kevin, thank you for joining us this Easter weekend.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
All right. So Kevin, most people don't know who you are. So before we get into that, just explain where you grew up, what is your life in Michigan like, and why are you running?
Sure. So I grew up in Macomb County in Centerline. For those that don't know, a small little 1 square mile city right in the center of Warren. And I've been here generally all of my life, attended school here as well. Spent some time outside of the state teaching and doing some other jobs, but I've been back here in Michigan for quite a few years. And the reason why I want to run for Attorney General to get the Republican nomination is so that we're able to restore Michigan. We need to make sure that we do three key things, and these three key things have not been going on. Number one, we have to really restore our faith and our trust in our government and our elections. Number two, we're going to have to make sure that we actually go after criminals and keep our streets safe. And that's a big issue. And the third thing, when we take a look at the state of Michigan, we're not doing really anything to stop the lawfare. Lawfare is something that has been going on for quite a while, and we got to put a stop to it.
So a lot of people see that what you're saying is a problem, that these issues are major issues, but they don't step up to run. What is it about the timing or your personality or your character that makes you want to do this?
Well, I just want to make sure that we're able to do the right thing here in Michigan, because unfortunately, I take a look at the AG's office and they've made some very questionable decisions, which I'm sure that you and I will be discussing a little bit more in detail later on. But really, when I take a look at the Attorney General's office, we have to focus on its key priorities and its key mission. I just want to make sure that we're able to actually deliver on that promise. You take a look at a lot of attorneys, especially when it comes to the electors case that you referenced. It's shocking how many people did not want to step up to defend these folks. They all believed that perhaps if they would step up and do something, that they could potentially be a target. And that's not how we should be running our society. And the same thing too, when you take a look at COVID, a lot of attorneys, there are a few, but a lot of attorneys didn't want to do anything to challenge the government. But actually in my prior roles, I did something to challenge the government. And actually, arguably, we were successful in that too.
So you mentioned a lot of these issues that have to be fixed, right? Where does your moral compass come from? Where does that originate? What do you think is the driving force behind what makes you want to see this as a problem versus other people who might just look at it and say, well, that's just the way the world is?
You know, when I was teaching and also when I was a superintendent of a school system, I would tell all of my students and I would tell all of my families one big key thing. Character is what you're doing when only God is looking. And frankly, we don't know what's going on in the Attorney General's office. We don't know what's going on in the governor's office. We don't know what's going on in Lansing for the most part. So we need people of integrity. I'm not saying I'm the best person in the world, but certainly I'm going to try my very best in order to ensure that we do the right things. My moral compass comes from my family. My moral compass comes from my faith. I'm a Catholic. But really, anyone that is a sincere and a devout follower of their faith, they probably would have the same principles that they're able to have serve as their guiding force. But for me, that's where really my moral compass comes from.
Kevin, you mentioned faith and how much of a driving force that is to you and to other people who may not be Catholic as you are, and how important that is to ground you and to give you a moral compass and an ethical compass. What is your relationship with the U.S. Constitution, and how does that fit into this context?
Well, the Founding Fathers did a wonderful job creating the Constitution. You have 7 articles, you have 27 amendments. It hasn't had to change very much since the late 1780s when it became the law of the land. And why is that? Because I do believe that when it comes to the United States of America, and specifically the Constitution, it was written really through an act of divine providence. God helped these gentlemen to craft that document. And that document has survived and has really thrived over many, many, many years. We're about to actually reach a milestone in celebrating the founding and the birth of our country. I mean, that's really important, and that's a magnificent achievement. But really, I would argue, not just me, but any attorney, any judge, we really are on the front lines of defending that Constitution and make sure it's carried out. And not to sort of just pay attention to some aspects of it and ignore other things. For example, you could take a look at the First Amendment. People want to protest both on the right and the left, perhaps, and that's absolutely fine, and I think that's wonderful. But that also means that it doesn't matter if you are a Republican or Democrat, doesn't matter if you're a liberal or a conservative, you should have the same right to peacefully protest. And unfortunately, without getting into a whole bunch of examples, but we could look at Michigan and beyond, we've had people persecuted and prosecuted and picked on for having views that are not really in the mainstream of the political party that might be in power.
And would you agree that the rights that are granted in the U.S. Constitution or by God, however you look at that, would you agree that those rights are granted to people on all sides of the aisle, all races, religions, and creeds, regardless of whether they're Catholic as you are or anybody else?
It is applicable and it's afforded to every single individual within the United States.
Okay.
Every single person has the benefits of the Constitution and should be protected by that document. And as, frankly, as an attorney, that's what I want to ensure happens with all of my clients. And I hope that any attorney out there would want to have the same thing for anyone that they represent or that they deal with.
Do you believe, well, let me rephrase that. A lot of people talk about the Constitution as a living document. What do you think of that phraseology when defining the Constitution?
I don't like it, but I'm not saying that the Constitution is dead,
Uh-huh.
okay? The Constitution is very much alive, but it's not a living document where it gets to change all the time. As I mentioned before, we've had 27 amendments to the Constitution. It's not like we've had amendments almost every year. It's very, very rare that we have a constitutional amendment. The 27th Amendment actually is really interesting, not to sort of get into that history, but it's all about congressional pay raises. It actually started almost at the birth of our country and actually got ratified, I believe, in the 1980s or 1990s. So, I mean, it has not changed all that much. And we need to ensure that when it comes to the Constitution, the principles that it stands for and what it wants to protect, that we maintain that. The thing is, we should not change with the times, with whatever is fanciful, whatever is popular. We need to ensure that we stick to our core principles. The more we deviate from our principles, the more of a country we're going to cease to be that sort of looks like the United States.
Interesting. So moving on from the Constitution, getting into your background a little bit, you are a defense attorney and you focus a lot on family law. So you must see a lot of the statistics with respect to divorce rates and things of that nature, and how they might be on the rise here in Michigan and across the country. What do you attribute that to? And in your practice, in the many years and the hundreds or thousands of people that you've looked at, what would you tell young people today who want to find a relationship, want to get married, and want to live a great life with somebody, but they're looking at these statistics and it's like looking down the barrel of a gun?
Yeah. This is what I would tell all the young guys and all the young gals out there. Frankly, I really think that they should marry a little bit earlier when they feel ready, when they have the right person. Unfortunately, people are getting married, I think, for all the wrong reasons. Either financial or because of societal pressure, or they feel like, oh, I just have to do something. That's not the reason to get married. And unfortunately, when people get married for the wrong reasons, then we end up with a relatively high divorce rate. What is encouraging is when you take a look at divorces among folks that get married a little bit younger, the statistics have actually shown that they get divorced at a reduced rate. So I think if they find the right person early enough and they do their due diligence, okay, and not just do things because it's fun, but you want to build a household and a family, that's what people need to do.
Excellent. And you're also a defense attorney. Do you feel like when you look at the criminality and the statistics in Michigan, do you think we're on the right trajectory right now? And what might you do, or what have you seen that's been done wrong, and what might you do to do things better?
There are a lot of things I can say about that, but I'm just going to kind of focus upon maybe two quick things.
Okay.
First thing is, when we take a look at crimes, we have to make sure that we are a little bit more selective in what we prosecute. As a defense attorney, my role is not to make sure that someone just gets off, okay? My role is to make sure that their constitutional rights are upheld, and that when it comes to the prosecuting attorney, whoever the individual may be, they actually have a big constitutionally valid defense that they have to actually overcome. They have to bring the evidence. My job is to make sure that the prosecutor does their job, right? So people in the prosecutor's office, I think, who authorize, warrants and prosecutions, they have to be a little bit more selective about what they prosecute instead of trying to throw a whole bunch of stuff at the wall. The second thing I think too is when we take a look at gun crimes, one thing that all of these, I would say Democrat elected prosecutors and some Republican prosecutors want to talk about is there's all this gun violence and we have to, be strict on gun laws. But they haven't been. And I'll give you one really good example of that. Here in Michigan, it's a felony, a 2-year felony for carrying a concealed weapon, CCW. Mm-hmm. And that is mandatory. So if someone is found guilty of that, there is no way, shape, or form that a judge or anyone else can have any type of leniency or leeway. So then they decide to engage in what we call legal fiction. They actually say, well, okay, we're going to reduce this to an attempted CCW. Logically, it doesn't make sense. You either have the gun on you or you don't. You can't just attempt to have the gun on you when you actually have the gun on you. And they do this in order to make sure that they can maybe engage in plea dealing or in a type of arrangement or settlement where someone can maybe stay out of prison or stay out of jail. And the way that I take a look at it, it's not that I want to lock a whole bunch of people up. It's not that. But if people are saying they want to be tough on gun crime, well, then make sure that when it comes to the CCW charges that you bring against felons, that you just don't plead them away. Really be selective about what you do and be intentional. Because right now, I don't really see that everywhere across the state.
So we're talking here about crime and gun crime and violence. I think that's a good segue into the concerns that many people have about illegal immigration. Mm-hmm. Now, there was a Yale study done in 2016 that showed that roughly 20 to 30 million illegal immigrants existed in 2016 in America, and since then the number has risen roughly 10 to 20 million. So we're talking about 40 million people here, maybe conservatively, reasonably, realistically. What is your position on illegal immigration, and do you believe that illegal aliens, nonviolent or violent, are criminals?
Well, first we have to take a look at the federal statute. What I've been hearing a lot in the media from various pundits and commentators is it's not illegal. They're not here illegally. They're talking about more so individuals that maybe had a green card or some type of visa or something, and then they overstayed. And then that's a civil violation. That's fine. I concede that because that's what the law says. But if you actually come into this country illegally, irrespective if you perhaps have a tendency for violence or not, you're not here legally. That's a crime. And I think that we need to make sure that when we look at Michigan, we're going to be protecting all of our citizens. I mean, one study I saw recently estimated that we have roughly, give or take, about perhaps 100,000 illegal immigrants in the state of Michigan. I'm not saying that all of them are violent, but what I am saying is that we need to make sure that we support federal law enforcement, we support the president and his priorities. He got elected because he wanted to make sure that all of these particular problems and issues surrounding illegal immigration are going to be cleaned up. That's the federal government's job. Our job here in the state of Michigan is, for example, I take a look at the Attorney General's office. They really need to ensure that they're going to support the president and federal law enforcement carrying that out. And they're not doing that right now. Right now, we're hearing a whole bunch of things about sanctuary cities across the country, even a few places here in Michigan. We need to partner with federal law enforcement and not sort of hide away. And inevitably, the executive orders that President Trump has signed and wants to have implemented, I'm generally in full agreement with them. We need to have a strong partner with the federal government, when we take a look at our Attorney General's office, our local prosecutors, in addition to our local law enforcement agencies, but we don't have that everywhere right now.
So you mentioned sanctuary cities. In a simple answer, are they legal, and is there anything we can do about them now?
Well, sanctuary cities, you can have a whole bunch of different ways to look at how to define them. Generally, it's where they have policies or procedures where they're trying to kind of degrade the importance of helping federal law enforcement. And I think that's an issue. Whether or not it's legal depends upon the context and the policy that we're looking at. But one thing I do know is if we have sanctuary cities in other areas, they're not going to be getting federal funding. And that's a big issue. Federal funding is really important in a lot of regards for local communities. And I think that when it comes to the hard-working taxpayers of Michigan who pay their taxes to the federal government, how would one feel if you're not able to get those monies back in the form of a grant or something else to help with law enforcement, to help with education, to help with whatever, because someone espouses to be a sanctuary city? So we need to ensure that when it comes to sanctuary cities, that they stay within the confines of the law. They can have whatever philosophical statement that they want, but they have to make sure that at the end of the day, no matter what their politics may be, they do not get in the way of federal law enforcement and the enforcement of our state laws.
You mentioned federal law enforcement. I've spoken with law enforcement agents across the state at local levels, and they're very aware of the illegal immigration problems in their cities. And they tell me that, yeah, we see they're here, we see that crime has gone up, but we can't deport them. We don't have the time, we don't have the manpower, we don't have the resources. We have serious things to deal with in real crime. So do you think that how would you help local law enforcement to do their job, or to help you, if you were Attorney General, to remove illegals, whether they're violent or not?
I would say really quickly 3 things. The first thing is what I mentioned before. We need to make sure that we partner with federal law enforcement, whether that's ICE or the FBI or whatever the agency may be. We need to have that coordination. Second, a lot of times we have these detainers that are put on perhaps someone that is an illegal alien. So maybe they're arrested for a state crime or there's a state issue. And the federal government says, hey, please detain them so that we can pick them up. A lot of times they're not being detained. And the reason being because either there might be a local policy where they don't want to hand these people over to ICE, or in a lot of cases, there isn't enough jail space or there isn't enough space for detention facilities. I'm not saying build more jails, but I mean, there are ways in order to ensure that if people have a detainer on them, we're able to humanely and appropriately house them, but make sure that we give them over to ICE so that they can complete their mission. And the third thing I think that we need to do is a lot more training. And I'm not necessarily just talking about law enforcement, but I mean local politicians and state politicians. One thing that the Attorney General's office does is to educate people on the law and how to interpret various things related to the various statutes, rules, and regulations. Right now, I think that we can do a much better job because you can just take a look at the number of people here that have different perspectives on how immigration law needs to be approached in Michigan, from the UP going all the way down to Monroe, going all the way to Kalamazoo or wherever else. Everyone has a different opinion. And it's okay to have a difference of opinions, but not when it comes to enforcing the law. There needs to be one concrete, uniform way in which we approach this. And again, Americans have voted for Donald Trump for a number of different reasons, but one of the biggest reasons is because they want to make sure that we get immigration under control. And I think that everyone in state government needs to pay attention to that too, and to help accomplish that reality.
Now, you mentioned Donald Trump. Do you support Donald Trump?
I do.
You do. And do you believe that he is like a big tent kind of a leader that can bring in people from all parties and all walks of life?
I do.
You do.
And I'll give you a really interesting story.
Okay.
So I mentioned that I lived outside of the state for a period of time. I lived in Denver, Colorado, when it was still kind of purple and it wasn't completely blue. But during 2015, 2016, of course, Donald Trump was running the first time. And Donald Trump, I actually was a delegate for him all the way back then, since the beginning. I'm not trying to claim I'm a purist or something like that. But I remember saying actually at the convention, a vote for Ted Cruz is a vote for Hillary Clinton. And I actually referenced, even at that same speech that I gave all the way back during the 2016 election to a group of people in the same room, that we have to have Donald Trump because he's a Big Tent guy. I mentioned the Reagan Democrats, for example. Ronald Reagan was able to get a big constituency of blue-collar, traditionally blue voters into the tent, and that's how he won Michigan and had a landslide across the country. Not once, but basically 2 times. So, frankly, he is a guy that can get a big tent. He can get a lot of people underneath it. And what I find fascinating, too, is, again, I don't have the exact stats and facts memorized right now, but take a look at the voter data from 2024, the people that were supporting him. I believe that when you take a look at the African American vote, it was huge, historically speaking. Like 20%-ish regarding some groups. Hispanic Americans, it was almost 50%. The thing I find fascinating too, talk about Big Tent, Donald Trump, it has a net positive approval rating among voters aged 18 to their early 30s. Think about that. That's supposed to be traditionally, all these folks are idealistic and liberal. They're going for Donald Trump. So if people say that he's not a Big Tent guy and doesn't attract a broad spectrum of people, then I don't know what these people are looking at.
Well, so that must have been the reason why when Cliff Frost was an elector here in Michigan, you took his case on. Can you go into detail, give people a little bit of history about Cliff Frost and Frost v. Nessel?
Yeah.
And why that's so important?
So there are 3 things I think everyone needs to know. There are 3 different pieces of litigation going on. Everyone knows generally about the criminal case. So Dana Nessel and her assistant attorneys general brought felony charges against 16 electors back from 2020. These electors were selected by the Republican Party, and they would cast their electoral votes for the state of Michigan for Donald Trump, should Trump win the popular vote. What these people tried to do back in 2020, because there was so much controversy, there were so many questions about the integrity of the election, they put forward purportedly a document, and this document was speaking about how they were elected by the Republican Party to actually cast votes for Donald Trump. They actually tried to petition the government. They walked over to the Capitol building, the state Capitol building, to try to go in to try to give these particular votes, and they were not allowed in. And people are thinking they were trying to steal democracy. The First Amendment guarantees that individuals have a right to petition their government to address their grievances. And that's exactly what that was. But what happens? Nope, they're all being charged with felonies. And the real interesting thing is, it didn't happen right away. 2 years went by, then they got charged.
Why do you think that is?
Because, frankly, no one else wanted to take the case. And what do I mean by that? Ingham County, where Lansing is located, investigated, and they said there's no crime. The Western District of Michigan looked into this. The federal government, the federal prosecutor for the Western District where Lansing is, looked into this and said there was no crime. So then the Attorney General says, well, okay, I'm going to go ahead and prosecute this. It took him 2 years. And we're still actually 2 years after the charges were filed, going up to present day, we're still at the district court level. And without getting into a whole bunch of stuff about criminal procedure, when you're at the district court level, that should take no more than a few months. It has been 2 years. We're still there.
Is this why people often say the process is the punishment?
Right.
And can you explain what that phrase means?
Absolutely, because people have to expend money for defense attorneys, and not me per se, certainly not me, but you have other folks that have paid their attorneys, my understanding, almost $250,000 in order to defend them right now. That's absolutely ludicrous, because these people, it's not that they just didn't do anything wrong, but what they're being charged with technically isn't even a crime. But that doesn't really explain the full extent of it, because that's the criminal case. There are 2 civil cases going on right now. You had 3 Democratic electors from 2020 file suit in Kent County against all 16 Republican electors. And they were claiming emotional damage. They were claiming all of these ridiculous things. Myself, in addition to a handful of other attorneys, we represent a good mixture of these folks. We filed a motion for summary disposition. Basically, that's a way to kick out a case. We're awaiting to see what Kent County wants to do with that. And last but not least, we actually have a case right now, I believe you referenced Frost v. Nessel. Mm-hmm. We believe that when it comes to Frost, in addition to the other electors, they're being charged with something that is frankly not even a crime. Okay? There was no forgery of any documents, period. End of story.
They signed their own name.
They signed their own names, okay. And they didn't have a document called a certificate of ascertainment, which is like this other document that you have the Great Seal of the State of Michigan, the governor signs, and all this other stuff. I won't get way into that. But they never forged any of that. Plus, we actually have a faithless elector law. I don't know if people really know about that. So, for example, Donald Trump wins in 2024. We have the electors to vote for Donald Trump. If one of these people said, you know what, I want to vote for Bernie Sanders or a Democrat or something instead, and they try to write in the name of someone else, it wouldn't even count. So it doesn't matter. None of this was going to result in anything. So what we did was to sue Dana Nessel in federal court and claiming that when it comes to his rights, in addition to the rights of all the other electors, their First Amendment rights have been violated because all they were trying to do was to bring attention to an issue and have the government address their grievances. And that's where we're at today regarding all three of these cases.
So I've heard that in Hawaii that there was a similar case like this several decades ago. Can you very briefly just explain that and how it relates to this?
Yeah, so there is precedent for having an alternate slate of electors. So when there was a controversy in Hawaii, without getting into all the details, you actually had two slates, both from the Republican and the Democratic Party, that were actually crafted and then transmitted to Washington, D.C. Inevitably, they were able to sort it out. But that has happened before. And even going back to the early portions of our country, we've had all of these different things happen too. I believe with Thomas Jefferson, and there were a few other examples, but I'm a history major, but I can't necessarily recount all those particular facts right now, but there is precedent for it.
Got it. So let's move on to another topic. You mentioned that you had done some work in Detroit. You were the superintendent of schools for the Archdiocese of Detroit. Can you tell us about that and how you ended up in that position, very briefly?
Sure. So I ran a school district, and that was the Archdiocese of Detroit Catholic Schools. We had about 86 schools, 27,000 students, about 3,000 employees, all throughout southeastern Michigan. And it was an honor of a lifetime to do that, especially when it came to the onset of COVID as well. Remember when all the schools were shut down? Mm-hmm. We actually did everything that we possibly could to keep these schools open. And by the way, not to brag about these wonderful people that I used to work with, but we take a look at the statistics and also the testing. These students that we had didn't actually suffer any academic or learning loss compared to the rest of the general population across the state of Michigan in public schools. So I enjoyed doing that work. When you take a look at these children during COVID, they really couldn't, at least in the elementary grades, do super well being able to develop socially and do other things because you need to be able to see someone's face when they're talking, when they're socially processing social cues and things of that nature. You need to see someone's face completely. That was not happening during COVID. So just like every other school district, at least at the inception of this got in the way of learning, which is terrible. But we wanted to make sure that that never happened again. And we took some steps in the Archdiocese to make sure that we wouldn't actually have a second lockdown.
Got it. One of the other things that it seems like you were very proud of, based on what my research I did, was that you had a program called Unleashing Our Catholic Schools. Mm-hmm. Can you explain very briefly what that was and how that affected inner city children in Detroit and your students there. What was the point of it?
Yeah, so Unleashing Our Catholic Schools was a strategic plan about how we're going to increase the affordability, the accessibility, making sure that we're staying true to promoting academic excellence and doing that within the context of the Catholic faith. There are a lot of different programs that were part of each one of those particular pillars, and I think that the students did remarkably well in addition to the schools. For example, we actually increased enrollment. And if people are following Catholic education, they know that that has been going down over time. We actually increased, one of the very few places across the country during that time period to increase enrollment. We actually were able to have a brand new academic assessment done because, frankly, I want to be able to show that our students are learning. And it's actually that assessment that we brought forward and that we implemented that showed that we didn't have any type of learning deficiencies or losses, unlike the public school district at the time during COVID. So that's what that was about, and a lot of those elements, I believe, are still continuing on to this day.
What do you worry about most in the Catholic and public schools today, based on everything that you've seen? And what is your opinion of the Department of Education?
What I'll say is I'm concerned that parents are losing their freedom and their autonomy. In the Catholic school world, we say that parents are the primary educators of their children. I believe that to be true for the public school system as well. But we've had time and time again across the country, in addition to Michigan, a lot of folks on public school boards who believe that they know better than parents, telling them, well, we're going to make sure to socially indoctrinate them in this way of thinking, or essentially try to dismiss maybe what parents are trying to teach and instill their kids at home. That's the biggest worry that I have. And what are ways we can get around that? I mean, frankly, we need to make sure that we have wonderful school boards that are concerned about one thing, the academic success of their children, and not these very bizarre, woke programs that really don't do anything other than just cause division and foster a lot of animosity.
Well, we can get into the wokeness a little bit later, but I'd like to focus on, you mentioned the COVID issue.
Mm-hmm.
We had a lot of lockdowns here
Yeah.
in Michigan. We were one of the hardest hit in the country. Do you believe those lockdowns were constitutional? And do you believe it's okay to do what was done to businesses here? And as Attorney General, how would you handle that kind of a situation? And is there anything that can be done about what happened to these businesses in the past?
Yeah,
these people.
That's a lot right there. Yeah, for sure. Well, let me just start here. I feel and I know, and it's not that I just think this, but the law thinks this, that the governor really has overstepped her bounds. And the Attorney General overstepped her bounds as well, supporting those particular lockdowns and that programming. Just because we have, a medical issue going on, and people can talk about, whether there really was an exigent circumstance or not, doesn't terminate the Constitution. The Constitution's not dead. It's not a living document either, but it's alive, and we have to maintain the rights and the protections afforded in it for everyone. And when I take a look at the schools in particular, the lockdowns I thought were very draconian. A lot of medical evidence that is coming out today doesn't support the lockdowns that were purportedly being done based on the evidence that was being put forward by supposed experts at the time. So much so that I remember the first lockdown when it ended, I'm like, this is great, it's done. And then there was a second lockdown that the governor wanted to do. She wanted to close down high schools, and enough was enough, really, at that particular situation. In addition to being the superintendent for the Archdiocese of Detroit for all the Catholic schools, I also served as the vice chairman for the Michigan Association of Non-Public Schools, or MANS for short. It's an organization in Lansing where it's comprised of Catholic schools all across the state, in addition to Lutheran schools and all these other faith and some non-faith schools. But we all got together and we said, we're not going to be doing this anymore. So we actually filed suit against the governor in the Western District in Michigan in federal court. And long story short, right before we were about to get our injunction against the governor because it violated the freedom of religion and the freedom of association, the governor had a press conference, literally, I believe, like a few hours before the judge was supposed to rule, saying the situation has changed, right? No matter what, I consider that particular case a win. It's a win for Michigan. It's a win for our kids. It's a win for the rule of law. And people have to stand up and be counted. We have to challenge government authority when it's being frankly abused. And I'm really grateful for the partnership I had with other people from across the state in bringing forward and organizing this lawsuit.
Great. So, with respect to COVID, there were a lot of rules that a lot of people thought were kind of arbitrary, and now it's come out recently that several of them are admitted to be arbitrary, such as like a 6-foot rule. Now, that rule didn't just apply at schools and in public, but at election absentee counting boards as well, which will be a nice segue into the election topic. Now, there is a case, O'Halloran v. Benson, in which a man, Phil O'Halloran, Dr. Phil O'Halloran, and myself and some others were basically suing the state because they were putting these draconian rules on people who were trying to oversee the election and challenge the election to make sure that everything, the process was being done properly. Well, you had to sit 6 feet back so you couldn't see anything that was going on in these election absentee counting boards. Well, the case was won at the circuit level, at the appellate level, and while it was at the appellate level, the Assistant Attorney General came out. Her name is Heather Meingast, and when she was arguing in front of the appellate court, she said that if the Secretary of State and the Attorney General didn't agree with the law, or if they found it too burdensome, I'm paraphrasing, that they would simply set it aside and basically ignore it. What do you have to say about that? And are you aware of that court proceeding?
I'm aware of the exchange where during the appellate argument that attorney from the Attorney General's office, where she basically said what you just articulated right now. And that's absolutely wrong. It's not just that I don't like it, but that's not how the Attorney General's office nor the governor should be functioning. The law is the law. As Attorney General, you have all the laws here in the state of Michigan. Your job is to uphold the law. Your job is to enforce the law. It's not to selectively enforce some things, and if it's inconvenient, to ignore other things. And that's the problem. I hear all the time, especially with all this lawfare, that, Donald Trump is not above the law. We've been hearing this for years and years. And he never said that he was. But effectively, what I'm hearing from the state here in Michigan regarding these election cases and other cases, well, they actually believe that to some extent they're above the law. They don't have to follow it if they don't like it or if it doesn't fit into their worldview. And that is not the right approach. That is not fostering the rule of law. If anything, that is just fostering confusion and division and just litigation when it doesn't need to exist.
So when you say that they're not following the law, that there was a recount of the 2022 election that was done by a group named Election Integrity Force. And what they found was that 70% of the precincts that were voting on what was called Prop 2 at the time, 70% of the precincts they looked at, they recounted, were either uncountable or didn't match election day totals. And 59% of the precincts that they looked at when they were looking at Prop 3, which was another proposal on that ballot, 59% of those precincts were either uncountable or didn't match election day totals. But all of the clerks and the canvassers and everything let this go. When we were doing this, I was part of that recount. When we were looking at the last day, when we were looking at Flint, there was precinct 14. 20% of the ballots were simply missing. They just weren't there that they said were there. When we tried to show this to the Board of Canvassers, the Board of Canvassers looked at it and there was a debate whether or not it should matter. What do you think about the situations like this? As Attorney General, if you saw data like this, would you say that the boards of canvassers, should be investigating these things, or should they be rubber stamping it the way that Dana Nessel and the Secretary of State?
Well, when you have something that is really obvious and there's smoke, there's probably perhaps a fire somewhere. At the very least, there should be a comprehensive investigation to see exactly what happened. Doesn't mean that perhaps, of course, that an election would turn out differently on a particular candidate or issue, but that's not my focus in saying this. We just need to make sure that every legal vote is counted. And if there's a huge discrepancy, we need to make sure that we're able to address that. I think it's really interesting that when you take a look at Jocelyn Benson, she has been time and time again, I think it's like 5 or 6 times, I can't even keep count, where the Court of Appeals has told her that she has had really unconstitutional rules, laws, regulations that she sort of wanted to kind of carry out, basically putting aside the rule of law. And you can't do that. So I think that in a situation like you're describing or any other similarly situated situation, we got to make sure that stuff like that doesn't happen. So as Attorney General, if there's smoke, there's fire probably, I want to investigate and see what's going on.
Do you believe that canvassers have the right to investigate or not?
I believe that they do, actually. I believe that they're not just there as a rubber stamp. And I know that people have other different opinions, but again, if they're just there to rubber stamp, then you don't even need to have them in the first place. There's a reason why, in terms of the architecture of what we have regarding our laws and our rules and our regulations, why they're there. And it's not there just to be a rubber stamp.
Do you believe that when the Secretary of State and Dana Nessel and Director Jonathan Brader issued memos to these canvassers saying that they were just ministerial and that they are supposed to rubber stamp, do you think that they were breaking the law when they did that, when they were intimidating these canvassers, or do you not think that's intimidation?
I think perhaps it could be conceived and contrived as intimidation. Whether or not it's unlawful right now, we have to take a look at the intent of anyone. So I can't say for sure what they did was criminal or not. But what I can say is issuing those memoranda, that's incorrect. That's absolutely incorrect because it's not supported by the law. They're just giving their opinion. They can't just say, oh, we don't like this, we want to interpret things this way and we're done. That's not how the law works. So I don't support that. Whether or not it's criminal, that'd be up for someone else to take a look at.
Okay. Do you believe that our elections are secure, and do you believe that the Attorney General should be investigating anything based on what you've seen so far?
Well, we can take a look at the most recent election, and Donald Trump won. And that's what a lot of Democrats are trying to say. Oh, see, that's proof that we have secure elections. I don't buy that. For example, you take a look at what the Secretary of State recently said. We found 15 people that are not U.S. citizens that voted in the most recent election. Wow, that's terrible. Because before, it was 1 regarding a Chinese student. I believe that was in Ann Arbor or attending the University of Michigan. And by the way, people don't ever really get this right or point it out. The only reason he was found is because he actually wanted to get his ballot back. He requested his ballot back. If he never did that, he would have never been discovered. So I have questions for the Secretary. I want to say, Madam Secretary, how do you know that 15 people, and it's only 15 people, voted illegally because they're not U.S. citizens? And where were these votes casted? And what methodology did you employ? Did you take a look, for example, at individuals that are in the qualified voter file and you reconcile them against the voter lists? What did you do? How did you actually verify that these people are U.S. citizens or not? Because if it's that easy where we can actually say someone's a U.S. citizen or not, well, then let's do that for the whole QVF, the whole qualified voter file. And I don't think a lot of people know this, but this is a file that only the Secretary of State has. This is not something that local clerks can get. This is not something that other people can get. And I understand because, frankly, when you take a look at this information, some of it is, kind of sensitive in terms of names, addresses, whatever else. But these are public records regarding where people live and where they're registered to vote. And no one can take a look at them. And again, this just came out in the Detroit News about these 15 people. Well, I, along with a whole bunch of others, I don't care if it's Republican or Democrat across the state, we want to know how they actually came up with that. Are we just supposed to trust it? Because I'll tell you what, I'm not going to trust anything at face value.
You bring up the qualified voter file. That's something that investigators across the state, like Tim Vetter, like Scott Ogney, MFE, Election Integrity Force, they're taking these files and they're analyzing them and going through them and finding all kinds of anomalies and manipulations, changes to the file, right? But one of the problems that they're noticing is that the files, it's very expensive to come up with all these files. And when you try to FOIA a lot of data, not just the QVFs, but other files, it can be time consuming and extremely expensive. I, myself, for instance, just made a FOIA for some text messages and from one day of the Secretary of State. Somehow it came to $105 an hour and several $100s for what amounted to about 5 pages of double-spaced text messages that they said they needed a specialist to run through. So do you feel, what could you do to make this process less burdensome to people? Because these are supposed to be, FOIAs are supposed to be available to a normal person so that they can see what their government is doing, and it's supposed to be transparent. But what we're seeing is that there's a financial burden put on people that's burdensome, and you're also seeing a time burden put on people where they just drag it out for months to give you 5 pages of data.
I think that when we take a look at the FOIA laws that we have in the state, perhaps we can have some changes or some modifications to make them more user-friendly. But as well, I think that the guidance surrounding how local agencies and state agencies need to carry out FOIAs, that needs to be addressed. I mean, again, I can't speak to the individual that was being paid $105 or whatever it was an hour, but at the same time, that's quite a bit.
He was an attorney like you.
but you know, it's kind of burdensome on regular folks, on everyday citizens, regardless of the information that they want to get.
So with respect to clerk authority, there are clerks like Tina Peters in Colorado and Stephanie Scott here in Michigan who have been prosecuted or are facing prosecution because they had elections and they tried to secure the data of the elections or investigate the machines after the election or their systems after the election. And because they're the clerk, they think that those are their machines and they should be able to audit their own elections and figure out what's going on there. The attorneys general in our state as well as Colorado don't seem to think that that's the case. What is your opinion on whether or not a clerk should have access to their own machines during and after an election and should be able to investigate them or have a certified third party come in and do so?
I think that when it comes to local clerks being prosecuted for trying to, again, well-intentionally execute their job, I think is misguided. I think that you need to have clear criminal intent and a violation of a particular criminal statute in order to charge anyone with a crime. The one recent development that I do welcome seeing in Colorado, yet to see it here in Michigan, is that Attorney General Bondi, our U.S. Attorney General, has attempted to intervene in that case in Colorado and say that it's in the interests of the United States and also the general public that we sort of put a break on what's happening over there. I hope the same thing happens here because there is still a lot of things that need to be sorted out, and people shouldn't just be charged with a crime because it's politically unpopular. People should not be persecuted or prosecuted because it's just something that someone wants to do in order to shut someone else up. I believe that these clerks, based upon what I've read, were acting, without any type of criminal intent. They're trying to get to the bottom of it. And none of this would be an issue if we actually had competent investigations that would occur at the state level. If we had competent, transparent investigations at the state level into allegations or into issues or into perceived abnormalities or whatever else, then I don't think we would have a whole bunch of other things happening at the local level. But people want to try to figure out what's going on since other people are not doing their job.
You mentioned investigations at a state level. Now, in a meeting online the Attorney General, who is investigating Cliff Frost, who you're representing, and 16 electors, she said very biased things about these people. She said they were brainwashed, and she said that she would insist that their court would be, or that their jury would be somewhere in a very liberal district, if I recall correctly. What do you have to say about that? And how does that affect this kind of case? And what does that say about the Attorney General?
Well, it's troubling to say the least, and frankly, very unethical at the worst. Michigan prosecutors actually have a code of ethics that they have to abide by. And they're not supposed to go after anyone because of any type of perceived political bias or perhaps of the political leanings of a location. What she said in that interview or in those comments was she brought the charges in Ingham County because that is a Democratic leaning county and they're going to take care of it. And then when it came to some of the other charges that she brought up in a Republican-leaning county earlier on other people where they were dismissed by the jury, she blamed it because those people were Republican. So she didn't even accept the jury's verdict in some of her prior cases because she blamed them to be Republican. I mean, that's not how our system of justice works. Our system of justice works because we actually have clear laws. We're supposed to have a disinterested prosecutor, and we're supposed to have a jury that makes findings and determinations about someone's guilt or innocence, and really just have justice flow from there. But her comments are very troubling, and in fact, perhaps unethical according to the Michigan Rules of Professional Conduct, which is what governs prosecutors in addition to all attorneys.
So now we're going to go back to elections again. The election integrity hearings with Rochelle Smith, are you aware of these hearings? And are you following them? And is there anything there that you find to be interesting or worthy or something that you would investigate as Attorney General?
Yeah, I've been watching a few of these hearings from my office, not going to Lansing for any of them, but I find it fascinating. I mean, there are gentlemen that have gone in front of that committee before recently, and I think they're going to be there again at the beginning of May, saying how there are many people, many citizens of Detroit that didn't vote. They know that they didn't vote, but according to the records, it shows that they did vote. Someone or something is going wrong. Someone is stealing votes. At least that's what it looks like. And that's something that the Attorney General's office or some prosecutor should be looking at.
I think that's a good point because people like Ramon Jackson, who you're talking about,
Right.
and Pastor Sewell, who work with the same people around the state, doesn't matter where you're from in the state, it's affecting everybody.
Yeah.
They're noticing all these things, and nobody's doing anything about it, right?
Right.
And it's been going on for years. Like Ramon's been looking into this for years, right? This isn't new to him. Just like Tim Vetter or Fani Montravati, they've been looking into this for years, and we bring this to people, and nothing happens. Why do you suppose that is, if that is the Attorney General's job?
I can't really say what her thought process is regarding not investigating it, other than she just thinks it's not convenient for her, or perhaps it might turn up some information she perhaps doesn't like. But again, I don't care if this was in a Republican area or a Democratic area. If someone didn't vote, they didn't vote. It shouldn't be that someone takes their vote and then gets to decide, oh, you're not using it anyway, so I'm going to use it for my candidate. And that's wrong. And what's even more troubling is, even if this was a massive clerical error, just assuming that for the sake of moment, all right?
Over and over again.
Over and over again. We have some systemic problems in our system. So people want to talk about election integrity and secure, free, fair elections. What Ramon Jackson and others have pointed out, these are things really warranting further investigation. And even though the Attorney General's office is not really looking into it, at least from what I've seen and what I've read, I'm very glad that when it comes to the Michigan House, and specifically that committee, they are looking into it. But there's only so much that they can do. They can look into it, they have subpoena power, they can do lots of things, but they can't prosecute. They can recommend charges to be looked at by a prosecutor or the AG's office, but they can't prosecute themselves. That's why if there is a crime, we need to actually have the Attorney General's office investigate and then charge, because this is wrong. And this is exactly why people are very unsure, people are very scared about what the future could hold. If people didn't vote and people are voting for them, that's awful. What about if people voted and then votes are changed? I mean, again, we have to take a look at process questions. We have to take a look at what has been going on, and nothing has really been done about this. And that's really troubling.
Now, getting back to the woke things, right? I mean, what you've shown here is that it doesn't matter if you're conservative or Democrat or anything like that. The elections are being affected, right? But moving on to ESG and DEI, what do you know about ESG and DEI? And yeah, well, first of all, just define that for the people.
Yeah, so DEI is diversity, equity, and inclusion. Let me talk about that first. I don't think that people are against having a diverse workplace, as long as when you take a look at the workplace or the educational institution or whatever the organization is, you actually have people that get positions based upon merit, that get it based upon the qualifications, not because they have some type of characteristic like their gender or their race or whatever it may be. And that's wrong. If I take a look at the whole thing about equality versus equity, because that E is for equity, that's not something that we should be embracing. Equality, absolutely, because we want to have equality of opportunity. But if we have equality of outcome, meaning that people get various supports so that everyone achieves the same goal, well, you're getting rid of merit, and that's not right. So we got to make sure that when it comes to DEI, for example, what Donald Trump has said in his executive orders, I think all states need to follow through. I think the state of Maine is not going to be complying with certain things. I think that various universities in the news, like Harvard, they're not going to be embracing the elimination of DEI. Well, then your federal funding might be cut, and all these lawsuits are going to happen, right? It's really unfortunate. It's a big waste of time. I think when it comes to DEI, and also if we take a look at ESG, these are terrible things that need to go, because we need to focus upon merit, we need to focus on the individual, we need to focus upon what's going to be best. I mean, nothing worse can happen than someone getting into a university, or someone getting a job, or someone getting a favor, a perk, a grant, whatever, because you just happen to check off a box for a characteristic that you can't even control, right? How about we give things to people based upon what they can control? Hard work and merit.
That sounds good. But as you know, there will be businesses that won't do that, right? So if a business decides to make decisions that go against the profit motive of their company, right? Instead, they go with this ESG thing where they're trying to get a higher ESG score rather than do what's best for their shareholders or for their business, in any other way. As an attorney general, is there anything that you can do, or anything that should be done, let's say, to prosecute businesses that do that, or is that not illegal?
Well, it's a kind of a gray area, but there are a few things that any attorney general can do, I believe. One is we have this law here in Michigan, the Elliott-Larsen Civil Rights Act, ELCRA for short, and you can see it all over the place. It basically says that if you have a class of people, maybe ethnic or race or religion or even weight, believe it or not, that's all covered in the ELCRA. You can't discriminate against that. So if I take a look, for example, at these private businesses, if they're violating the ELCRA or the Elliott-Larsen Civil Rights Act, they should actually face consequences. So I don't care if it's someone's not being hired because they're black or not being hired because they're white. That's not the right approach. And I do believe that businesses should be able to, for the most part, as long as they're abiding by the law, to make their own decisions, whether that's beneficial to them or a mistake. I take a look at Target, for example. Target really embraced DEI and all of these other things before. Then they decided to reverse course, and they're going in a different direction. I think that companies should have generally the freedom to operate their businesses as they see fit, but it has to be in compliance with the law. And if it's not, that's a problem. And you can't discriminate against people because of their innate characteristics they have no control over.
Many cities, it's not just businesses, have implemented DEI policies, and many people attribute rises in crime to this statistic or to this fact. And also, there are cities like in California where petty crime, things under $1,000, I think, are no longer prosecuted. I don't know if that's changed. What are your thoughts on that? Is that constitutional? Is it legal? Do you support that? Do you not support that?
I think the thing that you referenced in California was just addressed by ballot proposition out there in a recent election. And I think that's wonderful that the citizens of the state of California, or the People's Republic of California, however you want to refer to it, they said enough is enough. I mean, can you imagine going into a CVS and then you want to buy some toothpaste or deodorant and it's locked up, like in this plastic box? Like, what the heck is that?
I saw a video where they don't even put the things locked up anymore. They just cover the shelving in a tarp with photos and images of the products.
Right.
And then you have to go ask them to grab it from the back. So.
But, law has a variety of different purposes. One is to ensure that we protect people, but it's also to provide an incentive. If people know that there's no incentive to follow the law in that regard, well, people are not going to follow the law. And that's why you had all of these stores locking things up and even closing. These stores, a few of them even here in Michigan, are closing because of thefts that are occurring. You can't run a business that way, whether you're a big corporation or a mom and pop shop. So I think that we need to ensure that there's a fair and I would say equal application of the rule of law, because right now we don't have that everywhere. And I don't care about California. They're going to go their own way. But here in Michigan, we got to make sure that these prosecutions do happen for thefts, or we call it retail fraud here in Michigan, because we have to deter against them. Because every single time someone steals and gets away with it, or it's not prosecuted, that means you, me, and the good folks that are listening to this have to pay more for products or other services.
All right, rapid fire questions. As Attorney General, what would you do to make the office more accountable and transparent to all of the public?
Well, one thing I would want to do is to make sure that we have reporting and visits to the Michigan legislature a lot more than what's been going on with Dana Nessel's office. I mean, she was just in front of the legislators, I think a few days ago on April 16th. I happened to watch that. The majority of the time, I kid you not, it was a PowerPoint presentation that she gave about what her office does at the most fundamental level. The thing is, though, if I were Attorney General, you can do some of that background information for new legislators at a different time, separately, but in a public hearing, you want to be able to answer questions. She was there, I believe, for an hour and a half-ish, don't quote me exactly on that, and she only answered a handful of softball questions. This was in front of the Judiciary Committee. That's not good. So we need to have accountability, and that means people asking questions, people providing information. It's really troubling to me that a lot of times legislators have requested information from Dana Nessel's office, and they get it, but there are redactions or there are things that frankly are not complete, or it takes a long time. And that's not what I would do. If I'm Attorney General, I want to make sure I'm accountable to the voters of the state of Michigan. I have constitutional, in addition to statutory duties, I have to fulfill, and I want to show how I'm fulfilling those duties. And if people have questions, the State House, the State Senate, others, I want to make sure I'm able to be timely getting them a response.
What is your vision for making the Attorney General's office transparent and accessible to all Michiganders?
Well, one thing that we need to do is to really go after and prosecute what truly are crimes. Right now, we're prosecuting things in the Michigan Attorney General's office that are not conceivably a crime. It's just lawfare, if you want to call it that, or people being political. The other thing that we need to do is to actually connect better with our local stakeholders in our community, that is the voters. Right now, that's not really happening very well because people don't feel like they're being heard. It feels like someone just doesn't like Donald Trump, so we have an attorney general that files all these federal lawsuits that don't even really concern the state of Michigan. It's someone with their own weird political vendetta against someone that they don't like, and they're claiming to protect the citizens of the state of Michigan by either filing or joining a total of like over 20 lawsuits. So we got to focus on actually Michigan, focus on Michiganders, and focus on actually enforcing the rule of law so that we can protect and provide for them.
So in Muskegon, Kevin, there was a case brought to Dana Nessel regarding illegal voter registration applications. And these registration applications that were illegal were brought by a company named GBI Strategies. And when Nessel should have been prosecuting that case and should have done something about it, it appears that she simply covered it up. She opened a perfunctory case with the FBI, and now it's kind of been swept under the rug. And nothing's happened over the many years that it's been since it was opened up. So what do you think about that? And should Dana Nessel be investigated?
Well, I think the first thing we need to do is to investigate what happened concerning GBI. I understand that the message is it's being investigated right now, but it has been investigated almost perpetually for the last couple of years. That's way too long. If there is an investigation going on, I think it would be prudent to actually provide generally updates where this investigation is and where this case is at. If that's not provided, people are rightfully going to doubt what's going on here. I think as well what needs to happen too is, given the Michigan Senate, they actually sent a letter about GBI to Pam Bondi, to Kash Patel. I'm fairly confident now with this change in leadership in DC, it will be investigated. But what's really sad, it hasn't been investigated, at least from what I've been able to gather publicly here by the Michigan Attorney General's office. What's really concerning too is the Michigan Attorney General's office, they have a criminal investigation division, CID. It's actually like a uniformed police force, but they're all detectives. There's like, I believe, 40 or 50 gentlemen with police powers. So I don't think it's a lack of man or woman or people power. I think it's a lack of perhaps will to actually truly investigate this. Because if there's nothing there, this should be an open and shut case. That's what it should be. And it's not. And I think that, again, no one is above the law. I'm not questioning the Attorney General's motives because I don't know what they are, right? But what I do know is that we need to investigate what happened regarding GBI, especially if it's proven that there was something there with GBI, and if that could come out because of a federal investigation now. So if there is a cover-up, that's not a good look for the state of Michigan nor the Attorney General's office.
So if there was a cover-up, if that was found to be true, would you refer a case to the federal level to have them prosecuted?
Well, I don't believe that I really have to, and I'm going to tell you why. Because I think that the Michigan State Senate, their recent letter that they sent to Pam Bondi and Kash Patel tells them everything that they need to know, and I think that they, after investigating it, might do something on their own regarding bringing up any individual, perhaps even local and state level officials, on federal charges if appropriate.
So it seems like Nessel may be acting in a way that's very partial to one side or very biased. What would you do to make sure that your office as Attorney General would be totally impartial, regardless of what party you're in, your race, religion, creed, whatever? How would you make sure it's impartial for everyone, especially in these high-profile cases like Cliff Frost or like this Muskegon case?
Yeah. One thing I can tell you that I would bring back to its full complement, the Attorney General's office, at least during Attorney General Bill Schuette, had an ethics board. I think that ethics board is really important to bring back with a full complement where it's representative of people of all different types of political backgrounds and persuasions. Because legal ethics is really important. I think more fundamentally is I can just make an unequivocal statement right now. I'm not going to do anything that's just going to be blatantly in favor of the Republican Party and certainly of any political party. I'm focused on doing one thing, and that is what is right for the people of the state of Michigan. They want accountability. They want someone with the fortitude to do what is required of the job, because we haven't had that for the past 8 years.
Okay. So moving on to another topic, there is an opioid epidemic in America and in Michigan, just like the rest of the country. What would you do to ensure enforcement, but also ensure treatment and prevention for the people that are affected by this?
The one thing I know that the Michigan State Treasury gets right now is really large settlements, because there was a settlement with these various opioid manufacturers or pharmaceutical companies. So that's good. And that's funding a lot of different things, to the best of my knowledge, in order to treat people. So it's for treatment of individuals. It's for specialty programs like drug courts, where individuals perhaps can go through the legal system but have some coaching to help them not repeat or not fall back into the dangerous cycle of addiction. That's really important. But I think what we need to do is to recognize that this truly is a problem. And it's not just a problem that has occurred here in Michigan, it's coming internationally, more so from China. I think that when we take a look at China, all of the fentanyl and all of these other drugs coming over, the illicit drugs, not from the pharmaceutical companies per se anymore, but all these illicit drugs coming over, it needs to be stopped. And that means we need to really partner, for example, with Secretary Noem at the Department of Homeland Security. We need to partner with Kash Patel at the FBI. And to a certain extent with Secretary Hegseth at the Department of Defense. Because we got to make sure that we don't have these particular harmful things coming into our country. And that's the real danger, I think, when you have politics get in the way. If you're not willing to talk constructively with people on the other side of the aisle, you're going to miss out on opportunities where you can actually protect the people really effectively. And I think that's not happening right now.
So I think this brings us back to illegal immigration and a border that's open like a sieve, where everything's getting through. Do you think that has a lot to do with the increase in drug problems in this country?
I think it's, of course, the illegal importation because you have people that cross the border illegally. But it's also based upon these containers, shipping containers, coming from China. There needs to be a better examination at ports of entry into the country, in addition to perhaps here, even in the state of Michigan to some extent, of these particular things coming over. They hide things all the time in cars and finished products. And that's where I think that when it comes to local law enforcement, state police, and local prosecuting attorneys, because the Attorney General is actually the head of the Michigan Association of Prosecutors. We need to partner better, more with federal officials so we can put an end to this. And I'm not saying anyone's turning a blind eye, but if you engage in political discourse and you're like trying to blame everyone about all these other things, that creates distraction and confusion, and you can't focus on keeping our people safe.
So one of your main strategies would be to make sure that you are partnering with and having a good relationship with the people in the federal level.
That's true. And then as well, when we have folks on the state level that get actually criminally charged, we have to really go after them well. And I'm not talking about necessarily the users or the people that buy the drugs. I mean, they need to be treated, and they also have to be criminally prosecuted to an appropriate extent. But it's folks that are dealers, people that are distributors. We don't do enough, I believe, in going after these folks. And why? Because, again, we only have so many resources in the prosecutor's office or at the AG's office. We shouldn't be going after electors. We shouldn't be going after school board members. We shouldn't be going after parents. We shouldn't be going after people who wanted to keep their businesses open during COVID. What we need to go after are people that are dangerous criminals and people that bring in this poison from other countries and they want to distribute it to our children here. We can't put up with that.
Okay. So final question. A lot of people think that you are going to run for Attorney General. What can you tell them today?
And what I can tell you is that proudly I am seeking the Republican nomination for Attorney General in the state of Michigan because we need to restore the rule of law and protect our constitutional rights. We need to restore our faith in government and elections. We also have to ensure that we're going to make Michigan the #1 place where our families can thrive.
Excellent. Kevin, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
I look forward to seeing you on the campaign trail. I hope you'll join us again.
I'm sure I will. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. Kevin Kijewski. I hope we have given you, the delegates and voters of Michigan, a detailed glimpse into one of the brightest new faces representing the Michigan Republican Party. We want to thank Mr. Kijewski for taking this time to sit down with us today after his Easter weekend. And most of all, we want to thank you, the viewers. We know you have the option to sit down and listen to many podcasts, and we are so glad that you chose ours. Please provide your feedback so we can better this podcast and share this with your friends and neighbors so they too can get an insightful view into the future of Michigan. Check back soon for the next installment. Who knows who might be stopping by?